Good morning, I'm Roland Martin. Next on News One Now, the Supreme Court has a tie vote that actually saved unions and mandatory fees. How did the death of Justice Antonin Scalia actually play a role in that? We'll talk to a top union boss right here on News One Now. Bribery scandal rocks Detroit school system. Shocking, we've heard that before. 13 principals facing serious jail time for taking briberies, and yet still you have buildings that are shoddy and you have kids with no books. We'll talk to a state senator who's trying to help the district bounce back. President Obama goes to Atlanta to talk prescription drug abuse at a heroin summit. Isn't it interesting that whites are dropping dead because of heroin and now it's a national epidemic? Where was all this compassion when it came to crack in the 80s? Plus, the R&B group SWV talks about their new album, Still, and we'll talk about who they have a celebrity crush on. Plus, it's hump day, and you know we get a little crazy with our comedians, and so we'll see where Tony Woods has traveled from next. All of that, News One Now. Let's bring the funk right now. Folks, Justice Antonin Scalia died in February, and the effects of that we saw yesterday. A big victory for organized labor at the Supreme Court, where they split 4-4 on a case out of California dealing with mandatory union fees. That means the appeals court ruling will actually be upheld. Police officers, firefighters, teachers, and other municipal employees will be required to pay a fair share fee to help cover the cost of their union's collective bargaining agreement. The case stems from a lawsuit against the California Teachers Association, where there were several teachers who said they felt their money due should not go to the political activities of the union because they say they oppose those efforts. But the union argued, no, that money should be collected. That's why the case went all the way through the court system. The thought was that if this case had been overturned, if the justices agreed with those suing, that literally unions could have been cut off at the knees in accepting fees from their members. Joining us right now is Lee Saunders. He is the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Lee, glad to have you on the show. This is, I saw this tweet yesterday where someone said, they hate to say it, but literally the death of Justice Scalia saved public unions.
Well, I don't know if I would put it that way. I mean,
it would have been a 5-4 vote.
It would have been a 5-4 vote.
And it would not have gone in union's favor.
But it was a good day yesterday, let me put it that way. And maybe it was divine intervention that helped us with that. But what this is about, it's really not about dues. It's not about mandatory dues. It's about taking away the power that exists with folks who are in unions, who have collective bargaining, who have a seat at the table, who have the ability to talk about wages, to talk about benefits. But it's also an attack on working families, either in unions or outside of unions, because what's happening in this country, and we can see it every single day, is that folks want more wealth and more power at the top 0.5%, and they want to take advantage of those folks who are trying to play by the rules every single day to put food on the table to make ends meet. So this is a major victory, not only for union members, but for working families across the country.
But in this particular case, though, there is a strong belief, and we saw this in California, where there are teachers who believe in education reform, and they believe that the teachers union there has been fighting against that reform. A lot of those teachers are saying, wait a minute, why should my money go towards political activities that are not in my best interest, something I disagree with. That was actually at the heart of this particular lawsuit, and that's why it was a combination of things. It wasn't just a matter of collective bargaining. What they were saying is, why should my money go to support the political activities of the union when you're actually opposing things that I favor?
Well, let's look at the facts, though. They have the ability to get that money back, to retrieve that money. That can come back to the individual member or the fair share fee payer if, in fact, they disagree with the political stance of the union. But that union also negotiates wages and benefits, handles grievances. They are mandated to cover not only members, but non-members alike. So individuals should pay some kind of agency fee, understanding that if they have differences in political stances that the union has taken, they can get their money back. But again, That's not the issue, Roland. The issue is that we are under attack and working families are under attack like never before. We've seen it in state governments. We've seen it in state legislatures. We've seen what Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, taking collective bargaining away from public sector workers in that state. In state after state after state, workers are under attack. Now, what we've got to do is organize. We've got to mobilize. We've got to educate our communities. And that's exactly what AFSCME is doing. That's exactly what other unions representing public sector workers are doing. We're having one-on-one conversations. We're talking with our members and non-members alike, asking them to be a part of their union because it is their union. And we're getting a huge success rate in doing that all across the country.
Now, based upon this particular lawsuit, though, not only also employees who were not members of the union also were required to pay the fee, and had this been overturned, that also would have been affected.
Well, that would have been affected, and that was the crux of the case, because essentially agency fee payers who choose not to belong to the union, who choose not to be members, have to pay a fee. That's 40 years of law. 40 years of law that would have been overturned.
But is it fair that someone who is not a member of the union still has to pay a fee?
Sure it is, because they're receiving the benefits that they derive from the union, whether it's wage increases through collective bargaining, whether it's grievance handling, whether they have a problem on a job, benefit increases, representation rights. They receive that level of benefits whether they are members or not. So it is fair that they pay some kind of fee associated with those costs.
Of course, we've got our panel here, Ralph Chittams, Senior Vice Chairman of the D.C. Republican Party, along with Victoria Burke, Managing Editor of Politic365.com, David Swartlick, Assistant Editor of the Washington Post. Ralph, I heard you moan over here.
No, this is absolutely about a worker having a right to determine what happens with his or her wages. If I don't want to pay a fee to a union, I shouldn't have to. If I want to be a teacher, that means I want to educate children. I want to teach children. I shouldn't have to pay a fee to a union in order to do a job that I have a passion for.
Lee?
Well, we have public sector workers all across this country who are passionate about public services. They don't make a lot of money, but they're passionate about public services and providing to their own communities. These workers who are objecting to this still receive the benefits of a union. The union just did not fall out of the sky.
But that's
individuals voted to have union representation through a ballot process.
Right, that's right.
They voted to have union representation.
And not only that, we always talk about teachers. We never talk about police. Police unions are one of the most powerful in the country. My dad was a cop. He made very good money because he was in the union. So the idea that the workers don't benefit from the union is ridiculous.
No, I didn't say they didn't benefit. They shouldn't have to pay.
The Supreme Court keeps taking these cases, attacking unions and benefiting companies. Not a coincidence. That's why Merrick Garland being a nominee is a problem.
Yeah. I think you hit on the key issue, Roland, whether or not teachers have bought into this idea of school choice or tenure or whatever. If these teachers that are essentially the plaintiffs in this case have said, look, we don't want tenure anymore, we don't want the right to grieve, we don't want some of the other things that the union came along with, then fine. I understand that they don't want to be a member of the union. If they want the right to grieve, if they want tenure, then it's hard to see how they should not be able to have to pay.
But I don't accept
final comment.
I don't accept the rhetoric that unions do not represent their members, that teachers don't care about public education in this country. They do. And the union is a mechanism for their voices to be heard, just like the union is a mechanism for all public service workers and private sector workers for their voices to be heard.
All right, Lee Saunders, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, in Detroit, more corruption there. Feds announced yesterday 12 current and former principals were involved in a $1 million kickback scheme. Federal investigators say 74-year-old businessman Norman Shai is at the center of the scheme. Prosecutors say he paid principals from $4,000 to $324,000 to use him as a school supply vendor, but he paid out as little as he paid out that money in kickbacks. He's accused of scamming schools out of an estimated $2.7 million over 13 years. One of the principals charged, Ronald Alexander of Spain Elementary, is no stranger to the spotlight. Earlier this year, he was on Ellen DeGeneres. Well, they handed over $500,000 worth of cash in gifts to the school. A TV host donated the goods after the school appeared in a documentary showing the problems plaguing Detroit public schools. Just last week, Michigan lawmakers approved $48 million in emergency funding to ensure the school doesn't run out of cash early next month. But U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid says the charges have nothing to do with the existing financial troubles or the debate surrounding whether or not the state should help the school district more.
Public corruption never comes at a good time, and I know that we are in the midst of a very public debate about the future of Detroit public schools, but I want to make it clear that this case is not about Detroit public schools. It is not about the emergency managers that had oversight of these schools during the time that these crimes occurred. It is instead about these 14 individuals who breached their trust to the public by engaging in a bribery scheme.
Joining me on Skype from Detroit is State Senator Burt Johnson. Burt, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Roland. How are you?
Doing great. First and foremost, here's a problem. Here you have people out there, families, residents, who are demanding accountability in Detroit public schools, and yet you have principals who are engaged in bribery. Look, this doesn't help the case when you talk about getting more money when you have folks who frankly have been stealing or allegedly stealing from the district.
You're absolutely right. And I love our U.S. attorney. She's doing really good work, and it's important that this case go forward. But I'm going to tell you, it's exactly about Detroit public schools. It's exactly about the kinds of corruption that Republican lawmakers are going to say a lot of things about when I get back to Lansing. And frankly, this is what they're going to use to say that there should be continuing oversight. But let me be frank. The way that we have seen emergency management set up has allowed this kind of thing to happen. Okay, why do I say that? Because the way that emergency managers have decentralized operations in each individual school and put real money in the hands of unscrupulous people with no oversight, while at the same time being lauded for doing all these audits and that kind of thing, has really festered an environment where this kind of thing could happen. Nobody in a principal's position should have this kind of contact, this much contact with vendors who are always looking for sales, who are always looking for proceeds coming their way when you have a centralized operation in place. And this is the kind of thing that makes it very difficult for Black Democrats in a white-dominated legislature like the one that I work in to do really good business on behalf of our kids. Everybody thinks that we're incapable of handling our own business.
Well, but what it also points to is that, again, these folks are accused, they haven't been convicted. But let's just be honest. We've seen other examples of corruption in Detroit public schools, in the Detroit library system, in the city of Detroit. And so from a credibility standpoint from the public, it's a little hard when you hear help Detroit, help Detroit, help Detroit, when you got to go to the state capitol saying help Detroit, and they can say, yeah, but go talk to the folks who've been stealing from the district.
Well, I can tell you, I like to describe this job to people as easy work, hard job. But I can tell you there's some commonality here. You're familiar with the name Barbara Byrd Bennett. She's the lady who was our second in command under an emergency manager here, who we were told held a doctorate. That woman was excused from Detroit. She went over to Chicago, and in one of the larger schemes was found to be at the center of some corruption there. My point is that we've had a lot of the same puppeteers handling the money here in the city of Detroit. And so let's put aside for a moment the presumption of innocence and ask the real question, what has happened to the character of a lot of our Black leaders? It's really important to have that conversation while at the same time trying to get the money that's so desperately needed and alleviate the debt on top of the district and give the kids a chance to really be educated in our system.
Are there any plans to change how these things are handled that way, that, as you said, that power is removed from certain administrators to have the proper oversight to ensure the public, the dollars that the public invests in tax dollars are actually being used properly?
Yeah, that's one of the cornerstones of the legislation we just moved in the past week. We're hoping to take out of the hands of these emergency managers and under all these public acts that give them unfettered access, and then they appoint people who are the singular people responsible singularly for having control of certain dollars. We're taking that out of their hands and giving the control back to the locals. We need a locally elected school board who will handle the business of the district. We need a locally selected superintendent who will oversee the district, while at the same time using some of the same mechanisms that are in place to oversee Detroit's bankruptcy on the other side of the bankruptcy, to just make sure that all the finances line up. That organization, the Financial Review Commission, has done a pretty decent job to this point in making sure that the dollars are being spent appropriately and nobody's doing the wrong thing. All
right, then. Well, look, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And again, I hope that for the sake of the citizens in Detroit, but also the students that the U.S. Attorney keeps uncovering this stuff because, frankly, it's shameful when you folks go on television trying to raise money saying we don't have heat, we don't have books, but then all of a sudden they turn around are charged with corruption and accepting bribes.
We're going to keep trying to do the work of the people, Roland. I appreciate you for putting a spotlight on it.
Thanks a bunch, folks. Coming up on headlines, Donald Trump's campaign manager gets charged with battery of a reporter. Also, President Barack Obama pledged his $1.6 billion to fund the treatment of heroin addiction. I wonder why. Plus, we'll talk to SWV about their single off the new album, Man Crush Every Day. 15 after the hour, News 1 Now on TV 1.